we can put the Trump administration and the relationship with the Ellisons to one side for a minute. Romaine's going to go there. But first, remind us how this deal's been amended, because it does all come back to Larry Ellison, as basically every single story in media and tech right now seems to.
Yes, it does. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of questions. How really committed is Larry Ellison to this deal? How much is he standing behind his son? And this response today is $40 billion worth. This takes a big step towards addressing the concerns that Warner Brothers board outlined last week in its filing. So in addition to a personal commitment from Larry Ellison for all the equity in the deal, they've agreed to give Warner Brothers flexibility in the interim so it can make licensing deals over $10 million, for example, and change its executive pay. These are all things that Paramount wasn't conceding to. They also bumped up the breakup fee if the regulators don't approve their deal to $5.8 billion, which would be paid to Warner Brothers by Paramount. That's matching Netflix. So they're a big step toward meeting some of Warner Brothers' demands.
I am curious, though, Chris, about just the structure potentially of the deal and the idea that Netflix's deal actually involves lenders, banks, I should say. On the other hand, you have the Paramount deal, potential deal, that at least on the surface seems to be now a personal project that would be pretty much funded to a large extent by Larry Ellison himself. Have we gotten any sort of sense here as to whether shareholders in Warner Brothers Discovery would prefer one structure over the other, not just the aggregate amount being offered?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify that this is a personal guarantee on the $40 billion by Larry Ellison, not meaning that he ultimately will actually contribute $40 billion in equity. There are other partners that have been identified, Middle East sovereign wealth funds, Redbird Capital, et cetera. Ultimately, their plan is not to have Larry write a check for $40 billion. But that said, there are differences in the balance sheet for sure, and that's one of the reasons why Netflix refinanced its debt today, to kind of underscore that it has an investment-grade balance sheet and would continue to do so.
Sorry, let me just rephrase the question a little bit, because my understanding is that right now, with the way that the Netflix deal stands in terms of the financing itself, those lenders wouldn't necessarily be taking an actual stake per se in the company directly. So no dilution potentially for shareholders. What we know about the Larry Ellison $40 billion commitment, would that involve other outside folks taking an actual equity stake in whatever the new entity ends up being?
Yeah, so minor dilution on Netflix part, because they are offering some of the purchase price in Netflix stock, so there is a little dilution there. Huge dilution for Paramount shareholders, because that $40 billion in equity is being put in, and so that means more stock of Paramount Warner Brothers that will be owned by the Ellisons and their partners. So yes, the Paramount shareholder is seeing dilution.
The Paramount shareholders looking on, Warner Brothers Discovery have until January the 21st if they are indeed going to accept this go direct share offering coming from the Ellisons. But we know from last week that Warner Brothers Discovery still stand by recommending Netflix. Do you think basically David Ellison and gang need to increase the price as well as sweeten the deal in terms of who's actually good for the money and indeed what the unraveling price might be?
Yeah, a lot of people have said that. Mario Gabelli, Harris Associates, the fifth largest shareholder, Kevin Mayer, who you interviewed last week, Caroline, not an interested party, but well-known Hollywood deal maker. So yeah, that certainly seems to be the case, particularly because if Warner Brothers abandoned Netflix now, they would have to pay Netflix $2.8 billion, and Paramount hasn't offered more money that would compensate Warner Brothers shareholders for that loss. So yeah, all signs point to Paramount ultimately having to raise their bid.
And I suppose there's then what we were getting at before. The regulatory environment is an interesting one. It's going to be tough no matter which combination, because this has a real impact on Hollywood going forward. The jobs in it, the way in which content's produced, who they're going to sell to. But it also has an impact and has been explicitly or implicitly put forward by the Ellison team that they have a close relationship with the White House. Will that matter? Does that matter?
The Ellisons have certainly positioned their relationship with the Trump administration as a point in their favor. They've said that they're more likely to close, that Netflix has, just so much more power in streaming. Mixed messages from Trump himself. He said he's, going to consider both. This is how arbitrageurs make a living, trying to figure out the tea leaves here. Right now, I would think it's. Maybe people would agree that Paramount might have an easier route, but that's not certain.
It gets also to the idea, though, Chris, too. I mean, there was obviously a little bit of controversy over the weekend with regards to a 60 Minutes segment that appeared to have been canceled at the behest of their editor-in-chief, who at least is presumed to have some sort of ties to some of the folks in the White House. And it gets to this idea as to whether this is truly going to be a regulatory decision or much more of a political one with regards to who gets the rights to end up buying Warner Brothers Discovery.
Well, certainly when you see all of these steps that Paramount and the Ellisons have made, some of them before their time, but Stephen Colbert's show being canceled, the settlement with Trump, all of the changes they're making at CBS News with Barry Weiss coming in and an ombudsman being appointed to oversee fairness. It certainly is a continuation of actions to try to appease people in Washington, and whether that continues to be the case. I mean, Trump has complained as recently as last week about his coverage there. So always a wild card.